Welcome everybody to the special lunchtime session. Thank you for taking your lunch for this. My name is Benjamin Pierce, and I'm going to be giving you a little report from the SIGPLAN Ad Hoc Climate Change Committee. Anyone that reads a newspaper already knows that human activity is significantly increasing the atmospheric concentration of greenhouse gases, such as carbon dioxide, that this is warming the planet, and that this is bad. Climate scientists tell us that total warming must be limited to 2 degrees Celsius to avoid the worst effects of the change that we're seeing. To have a 2/3 chance of meeting this goal, we need to keep total emissions under about 3 trillion tons of carbon dioxide. That's the whole pie in this picture. And of this, we have already used about 2/3, giving us 800 billion tons left to use. That's our budget of all greenhouse gas emissions ever. So 800 billion tons. That's a big number. What does it mean? I have no idea. It's way too big. So can we make it more personal? One way is to ask, how long before it's gone? And the answer is, at our current rate of emissions, we will reach 800 billion tons in 19 years. Okay, that doesn't seem like very long, but it's still hard to comprehend what that has to do with me, because obviously different people in different parts of the world emit different amounts of greenhouse gases. So here's another way to make it personal. There are about 700 billion people on the planet right now. And to simplify the calculation, let's assume that everyone gets an equal share of the remaining carbon budget, no matter how much they've already used, and that no new people get born. So we divide 800 billion by 7 billion, and we get 114 tons per person. So this is each person's lifetime CO2 budget. That's a more digestible number, but what I really want to know is, if that's my lifetime budget, how fast am I going to burn through it? Is it going to last for my lifetime? If I'm an average American, I emit about 19 tons of carbon per year. So I will use up my entire lifetime budget in 6 years. It's useful at this point to let that sink in a little bit. If I'm an average American, I'm going to emit all of my lifetime share of greenhouse gases in the next 6 years. If I'm an average European, it will take about twice that long, and if I'm from another part of the world, a little bit longer. So what should we do? Well, one obvious answer is nothing. I've been emitting this much carbon my whole life, and if I'm going to be burning up someone else's share soon, well, that's their problem. However, I have 2 young children, and so that option doesn't sit very well with me personally. If you don't have children, you may also not like it for reasons like fairness or stewardship. So what else? Should I hope for a technological fix? Well, yes, I do hope for a technological fix. In fact, there are lots of exciting things happening, and some of them will surely help. What there isn't right now is any technology that anybody is confident would solve the problem and that is ready to build out to the required scale in the required time frame. So yes, we need to work on technological solutions, and we need to do everything else we can. So what else? Should I vote for politicians who are going to do the right thing? Of course I should. To address this problem on a global scale, we are going to need much stronger action at a national and international level in doing things like setting prices on carbon. But again, we don't have time to wait for politicians to solve everything for us, especially in the current political climate. We need to get started, and we need to do it now. So how do we start? Well, we are researchers here. We know what to do when we're faced with a problem that seems really big and hard and we don't know what to do about it. We start with some data, take a careful look, and then try to figure out some part of the problem where it seems like we can make progress and that seems likely to help with the overall problem. And then start working on that, see where it takes us. So let's take a more careful look at how this 19 tons per year breaks down. That'll be our data. Since we're in St. Louis, I'm going to keep using figures for an average American. You can adjust as appropriate. So this is a breakdown of 2010 carbon footprint for an average American. And you probably can't read the captions, but the bluish part in the upper left is from transportation, and the red part is from housing, and the yellow part is from products. The orange part is from food, and the green part is from services and miscellaneous things. So many of these big blobs in this picture are things that I can actually do something about. I can buy electricity that's generated from wind or solar. I can heat and cool my house with electricity instead of gas. I can drive an electric car. I can cut down on animal protein and dairy. And doing all of that cuts my emissions by something like half. So that is good. Unfortunately, we missed something critical. This picture is for an average American. Am I an average American? Look at this bit. The average American emits 0.6 of a ton of carbon each year from flying. How much is that? It's about half of one transcontinental flight. It's about 1/3 of a transatlantic flight, or about 1/6 of a flight to Australia. So in this respect, I am nothing like an average American. At this point, you may want to do your own calculation. Your mileage, as it were, may vary. I'm sure the travel footprints of people in the room do vary widely, but for me, air travel is a gigantic part of my personal carbon footprint. It dwarfs every other category. So the conclusion is clear. If I'm concerned about limiting my carbon emissions, air travel is a huge issue. So this raises a question. Air travel is a problem for me. Some of you may feel it's a problem for you. But is it a problem for SIGPLAN? Is SIGPLAN the place to be addressing this problem? Wait, let me say it better. Is SIGPLAN the place to be addressing this problem? No, of course not. Climate change is a hard problem, it's a wicked problem, and it's an urgent problem. It requires action on many levels, on many fronts, individuals, organizations, cities, states, countries. So this is the wrong question. What we need to ask is whether SIGPLAN is a good place to address the problem. That is, are there things we can do at the SIGPLAN level that will make a meaningful difference? A few of us have spent the last 18 months trying to answer this question, and our answer is emphatically yes. There are things we can do in SIGPLAN and ACM that will make a difference. In fact, there are a lot of things that one could imagine doing that would make a difference. Virtual PCs, as ICFP has started doing, co-locating conferences, et cetera, et cetera. You can read about lots of these in a report that we produced. But right now I want to tell you about just one that we're working hard on right now, namely carbon offsets. Very briefly, here's the idea. We have an offset provider. This is someone who is able to do something that's going to save emitting some number of tons of carbon. So maybe they want to plant some trees, or maybe they know how to capture methane from natural gas extraction, or from a landfill, or from dairy herds. Maybe they want to buy cook stoves to give to people so that they don't have to cook on open fires, et cetera, et cetera. There are a lot of different offset providers doing a lot of different offsetting projects. Okay, so there's the provider over there. I want to take a flight which is going to emit some number of tons of carbon dioxide equivalents. And I pay them some money, we agree on a price, I pay them some money, they do their thing to save the carbon, I do my thing to emit the carbon, and we go on. In reality, that's a simplified picture. The reality is a little bit more complicated. There are more organizations in the middle, so there are offset providers, and then there are offset verifiers that make sure that the provider is doing things that really do save carbon or take carbon out of the atmosphere. There are offset vendors that act as marketplaces for individuals and organizations that want to buy carbon offsets to meet with people that have them to sell, and so on. But this is the basic picture. So how would this look for SIGPlan? ICFP, for example, could raise its registration fee by, say, $30. This would be the cost of, this would be assuming that an average attendee burns about 1.5 tons of carbon getting here and back home, and taking $20 per ton as a kind of middle-of-the-road cost that carbon vendors charge. We would probably offer an opt-out for people that would find the extra $30 a hardship, or that didn't agree with doing things this way. The conference would take in this extra money. The general chair of the conference would find an appropriate carbon vendor and give them the money to give to an offset provider. This would make the conference carbon neutral. So, is this a good idea? I think so. Why? First, it's easy and relatively cheap, and it's something that we can do now that actually makes a difference. Second, it puts climate change on the agenda and it makes it part of the discussion while we're having the discussion about longer-term alternatives and strategies. And finally, it puts a price on carbon emissions. So I said earlier that what really needs to happen is governments need to put a price on carbon emissions. They are doing that slowly. We can do that internally by just choosing a price and saying, we're going to say carbon emissions cost $20 per ton, and we're just going to impose that tax on ourselves. That has the good effect of giving organizers of conferences a number to optimize. So lots of organizations are doing this already, Google, Microsoft, Dell, TD Bank, et cetera, and they report very good effects internally in changing people's calculations about the way that they use resources. So we think this is a good idea. I'd be happy to talk to you more about it later, but I don't want to take too long now. So let me come to my conclusion, which is that SIGPlan and ACM, more broadly, have both a responsibility and an opportunity to lead in this area for several reasons. First, because the activities that we do in the course of doing our science have a non-trivial harm that needs to be balanced against the non-trivial benefit that we provide to society. It's our responsibility to do that. Second, that we as scientists, we are not climate scientists, most of us, so we're not doing the science, but we do know how to listen to scientists and evaluate their claims. And I think that gives us a responsibility to listen to the warnings that we're getting from our colleagues in climate science. And finally, we have the opportunity to act as a model, as SIGPlan often does for other parts of ACM, and ACM has an opportunity to act as a model for the many other scientific and academic societies that are out there. So how can you help? First and foremost, come and talk to us. In particular, if you are not convinced by what I've said or actively disagree with what we're doing, I would love to hear from you. I would also love to talk if you do agree. There will be a survey post-ICFP, and you're welcome to add suggestions or comments about this set of topics. I mentioned the 2 reports that we've written, which you can find by Googling SIGPlan climate. There is a mailing list for people interested in this issue, You can calculate your own carbon footprint. You can offset your travel to ICFP. I'm using a vendor called Cool Effect. There are lots that are good, but I happen to like that one at the moment. And we have other projects that we're working on that we would love help with. So please do come and talk with us. And I will stop there and see if there are any questions.
Hello? Oh. Yeah, so questions are on the slide.do as they are for the talks. So would making conference attendance non-mandatory for publication be a feasible step toward reducing emissions as well?
It is certainly a step worth considering, and you'll find a little discussion of it in the document that I pointed you to here. I haven't thought about it enough or discussed it enough to have a sense of whether it's globally a good thing or a bad thing, but it's worth pointing out that it's happening a little bit already, just because of concerns like travel bans and epidemics happening in parts of the world where conferences happen to be and things like that. So we're seeing already a push to technologically make it available, and then we need to discuss and choose whether that helps the carbon footprint more than it damages the experience of the conference.
And then another person asked, should we phase out in-person conferences as a primary publication vehicle in computer science? Because I think in many fields it's not that.
Yeah, so this topic comes up a lot. Should we just not have conferences, or should we have conferences in Second Life, or maybe something a little better? I don't see that happening in the next few years. So I think we may get there in a decade or 2 decades. Who knows what the pressures will look like over that time scale. I think over the next few years, we get tremendous benefit from the conferences that we have, and I'm among the people that would think that would be a shame to give up. So I'm more on the let's offset the harm that we're doing, let's trim things where we can, and let's have a big discussion about what are the most impactful ways to go forward longer term.
And then how realistic are the carbon offset prices that you're showing? And is there a way to tell whether they actually work?
Okay, 2 separate questions. So first of all, what about pricing carbon offsets? The carbon offset market is still kind of settling down. So if you look at the carbon offset situation, even like half a decade ago, it was kind of the Wild West, and the reliability, the verifiability of offsets was very much subject to question. There were issues about maybe bogus offsets being promoted and sold. That has gotten a lot better in the last 5 years and is steadily getting better, and there are lots of forces pushing it in that direction. For example, so we're talking here about voluntary carbon offsets. There is also a regulatory carbon offset market that organizations like California have created in there to allow the state to offset its activities. And that is pushing the whole game in a more serious direction. So that's that. And then as to verifiability, again, in the Wild West days, that was a significant problem. It remains a problem, but a lot of verification organizations have sprung up to help address that problem. So it's an issue to pay attention to, and one that people are addressing.
Has SIGPlan considered making conference attendance non-mandatory for publication purposes? So still have the conference, but perhaps allow a remote presentation, or?
So I think that's the same question as before, and the answer is yes, it's on our list of things that we've talked about, but we have not gone into great detail.
They keep changing the order on the screen here as people upload them. And does carbon offsetting actually scale well enough to, like, is it feasible to offset all carbon emissions?
That's a great question. So what one would expect to happen if a lot of people get into buying carbon offsets is that as the amount of supply and the amount of demand meet, that the prices would start going up. And so what's nice about that is that the system adjusts itself. people that are really paying for carbon offsets and willing to do that can use the price of the offsets to judge kind of how much pain they're willing to go through to do the thing that they're offsetting.
And what about optimizing conference locations to cut down on flights?
That is another thing that we've talked about, and that one we are more actively looking into. So there's some data needed for that we're in the process of gathering.
Great. And then, isn't individual consumption dwarfed by commercial or industrial consumption? That is, do market-based solutions have a chance of succeeding when this requires political intervention and companies have a larger influence here than individuals and are only concerned with making profit?
Yes, of course. There are lots of people out there that are emitting lots of greenhouse gases and are not going to stop, no matter what we do about offsetting conferences. And we're going to have to, for some of that to get taken care of, we're going to have to wait for governments to get in the game. I do not think that's a legitimate reason for not acting ourselves.
And then how is the average CO2 production for Americans calculated? Or is it all based on individual choices or also things that we can't really avoid as individuals, like participating in large systems like global trade?
That's a complicated question that I will defer to later on. So lots of people calculate carbon footprints, and here I chose a representative one. You can find numbers that vary by, factors of 2, but not factors of 100.
Okay. And should we also have the option for a corporate sponsor who can advertise at ICFP while contributing most or some of the fee to the climate offsets?
I think that's a fantastic idea.
Yeah, great. So I think we're out of time, and thank you very much for the report.
Thank you all.
For the work.